while the slides are sort of coming in, if I was to apologise for the talk that I'm about to give, because I'm giving it on behalf of my sort of colleague, Professor David Hanna, who sends his apologies, and he unfortunately is not able to join us because he's in the at the conference in New York at the UN's building today. And so what I'd like to do is to give a little bit of an overview of sort of collaboration from the UNESCO water family. And it's some slides which David Hanna has shared with me. So if we could have the next slide. I think it's important to reflect on the scale of the problem that we have today. I mean, we're all familiar with the nature of the hydrological cycle, but what we need to reflect on is the degree to which we sort of individually and collectively have modified the hydrological cycle. If we could have the next slide. And this is just an illustration that colleagues at sort of Birmingham have collaborated in a global overview of the water budget to emphasize the scale to which we have modified the hydrological cycle. And we have affected both the way in which water moves through individual catchments, but also the scale of the water quality sort of problem. And from my own sort of personal perspective as a hydrologist, but living in Europe, I find it sort of fascinating how many of the problems have very strong geographical sort of contexts. In other words, they vary sort of globally depending upon where we sit within individual catchments. But one of the opportunities that we have through sort of UNESCO is that there may be sort of transferable sort of skills that we can sort of bring, and solutions and ways in which we can work with stakeholders and work with people that are very significantly affected by these problems to give them an opportunity to express the difficulties they have and to see the degree to which so government and sort of universities and academia can try to provide solutions. So if we have the next slide. And so the scale of the problem then is that we have a global water crisis, as we're all familiar with. It's an interdisciplinary sort of problem. And if we have the next slide, which will be just an animation, we have essentially, sorry, previous, and so we have a very real interdisciplinary sort of problem, which we can think of as a wicked and intractable sort of problem, as we see it at the bottom. It's characterized by significant sort of complexities, uncertainties. So from an academic perspective, there's a lot of there for us to think about. We need to reflect also perhaps on our sort of lack of understanding of many of the interrelationships between sort of people and the water resources that we rely upon. In many cases, there's a lack of data, but there are new opportunities there. And we have interconnected problems that require that sort of interdisciplinary solution. So if we have the next slide, please. So some of the solutions that hopefully we can provide are finding new ways to bring people to working together. And this is my sort of personal slide of a project that I'm involved with in Europe, which is an initiative to develop new research infrastructure that looks at linking rivers to seas. And the opportunity we have here is that in today's day of all sorts of breaking down some barriers between individual countries and individual disciplines, we can provide sort of new ways of looking at the Earth system. And in this sort of particular case, the Danubius RI project is looking at opportunities to embrace interdisciplinary science at the interface between the rivers and the seas. And that exemplifies sort of many of the projects that we sort of see that have global reach, that are addressing very real problems of societal sort of challenges and seeking to provide solutions that enable us to, in this sort of case, provide some new sort of coastal defences, look at ways in which water moves through catchments in new ways. If we have the next slide, please. So the background then really is that from a UNESCO sort of perspective, the S in UNESCO stands for that sort of science for sustainability and society. And whatever our individual backgrounds, I think we should all acknowledge the scale of the changes that we've experienced over our sort of lifetimes. We see the ever-increasing rapidity of environmental sort of change, and what UNESCO sort of seeks to do is to both sort of provide the basis of, say, water education, but sort of bridge the data and the knowledge gaps, moving up via that sort of pyramid really on the left-hand side to ultimately seek to ensure water secure world and resilient societies. So there is a very rapid rate of exercise of excellence and of innovation, and the role of UNESCO should be sort of bringing people together. If we could have the next slide, please. So there are some really good examples of initiatives that UNESCO have sort of led on over many years. I remember when I was a graduate students doing a master's course in in North America, we were working on some basins that were set up as part of the international hydrological program, the IHP at the time. And the Intergovernmental Hydrological Program provides well, really a sort of landmark initiative as the only intergovernmental program which is devoted to water science. And it provides its opportunities to link to education and to capacity building. And that's is central to UNESCO's mission to contributing to peace and society and security. If we could have the next slide, please. So the as UNESCO has sort of developed and as it's sort of changed over the years, UNESCO has been developing a network of networks. It's almost in a, we can sort of envisage this as almost like a World Wide Web, if you like, of sort of networks. It's the UNESCO Water Family. It links different water institutions within individual countries, within individual regions, and sort of internationally. There are UNESCO staff in Paris, as we see there. We have the World Water Assessment Programme that was set up, I think about 25 years ago or 30 years ago by Gordon Young, who and that is was tasked with bringing together different water activities of the UN family. We have some national committees of the IHP. We also have UNESCO water chairs and a wider network. And also UNESCO water-related Category 2 centres. If we go on to the next slide, please. So there's a very wide network there, but I think fundamentally it's important to reflect on the nature of the problem that I presented earlier. It's also important to engage with the various activities that are fundamental to ensuring that mission that centrally are fundamentally concerned with education and capacity building. And the key word for me here would be knowledge exchange, and so it's recognizing that it is not knowledge transfer but knowledge exchange, and it's a two-way exchange or a three-way exchange between people that have the problems, people that might provide solutions, and looking at new ways in which we can adapt to these fast emerging challenges, and ultimately the legacy should be that cooperative network. We could have the next slide, please. So education capacity is really important, and we can look at specific examples of individual networks which exemplify the way in which UNESCO can work. My colleagues, David Hanna, pass on this slide, looking at the Unit Twin network. And one particular project that he and others are currently working in is looking at eco-hydrological interfaces. It's building links between researchers and stakeholders in the UK, in Europe, elsewhere, in Australia, and in India, and looking at ways in which we can quantify threats to different ecosystems as we experience such a fast changing environment, and actually reinforce the nature of the current networks that we have at perhaps a national level. We go on to the next slide. Ultimately, and this is my last slide, the purpose therefore really with UNESCO should be very much looking to connect researcher, policymakers and the public. And so meetings that we have you very kindly organised this afternoon, I think are a really important part of that process. Ideally, it would be nice if we were meeting in person, as we see in these slides here, but the key people should really be those stakeholders that we see on the lower right, that can tell us much about individual rivers, individual water problems that people living outside the region might not appreciate. if we're able to sort of capture that sort of knowledge and find some new ways of exchanging it, then actually the solutions to almost all the problems that we sort of see today should be within our grasp, within our sort of remit. And I'll finish there, but I would like to thank you again.